Hello again. Time then for the press preview. It's our first look at the front pages of tomorrow's papers, and we'll be looking at the headlines tonight with the PR consultant Alex Deane and the broadcaster and former government minister Anna Soubry. They'll both be with us from now until just before midnight. A very good evening to you two. We'll chat in a moment after we've had a look at some of those front pages for you, beginning with the Eye, leading with a poll suggesting that 80% of people think the government is failing to tackle the energy crisis. The first issue Liz Truss will face, assuming she becomes Prime Minister, of course. But the Telegraph says that Liz Truss has a plan to tackle energy bills ready to go on day one of her premiership if she steps over the threshold of number 10. The FT, however, has been doing its sums and says Liz Truss's tax and spending plans, if she comes to office, would leave a £60 billion hole in the public finances. The Express predicts that the new Prime Minister will call a general election, perhaps as early as October next year. The Star predicts the cost of energy will ruin Christmas, as councils won't be able to afford to switch on their festive lights. Liz Truss comes under attack from a senior police chief in The Guardian over her plans to reform policing. They're labelled as meaningless and unwise. Well, The Times reports that Russia has delayed reopening its gas pipeline to Europe following a maintenance break after G7 countries had slapped a price cap on Russian oil sales to try to limit Putin's funding for the war in Ukraine. The Mail says that pressure is mounting on MPs to drop the parliamentary inquiry into Partygate after a top QC called it unfair and flawed. While the Mirror leads with news that the Queen has been forced to miss her favourite Highland Games, even while at Balmoral, because of her continuing mobility problems. And finally, The Sun leads with news that a chain of restaurants famed for its waitresses in skimpy costumes is to sponsor an under-10 football team in Nottinghamshire. And please remember that you can just scan the QR code you can see on screen during the programme. Check out the front pages while you watch us discussing them. And to discuss them, PR consultant Alex Deane and the broadcaster and former government minister Anna Soubry. Really nice to have you both with us this Friday evening. What a few weeks it's been, Anna, but we'll soon be out of our agony, won't we? We are going to get a new Tory leader, new Prime Minister. We'll hear who it's going to be on Monday. They'll go into number 10 on Tuesday.
Yeah, and there will be a lot of people who will say, thank goodness now that it's all over, because it's dragged on. And of course, as it's dragged on, this crisis is spiralling. And the Eye quite rightly points out that, and it says it's an incredible poll that the Eye's conducted that has found that 80% of voters say that they're pretty cheesed off with this government because it doesn't have a plan. And it doesn't have a plan, and it should have had a plan, and it should have had that plan and been put into place long before now, given the way that energy prices have rocketed. There's another stat in this poll which I thought was very interesting and extremely concerning, which is 86% of people that were polled said that they would be spending less money. I mean, this is obvious, but that they would be spending less money on the high street. So yet again, another terrible squeeze on our high street. They're going to be squeezed because of the rise in energy prices. There's no cap for small businesses. And on top of that, obviously, because all of us are going to have so much less money to spend, we won't be spending it on the high street. I mean, we really are going into the most desperately concerning of times. I honestly think it's going to be the worst, certainly in my lifetime.
Yeah, it's all extremely worrying, which is why the Daily Telegraph has the headline, Alex Energy Plan on day one for Truss. Well, you'd sort of hope so, wouldn't you?
Yes, and the piece, of course, doesn't go into much detail because we don't know what the plan is yet. But it's a relief, of course, to know that our presumptive Prime Minister will be announcing something as soon as she takes office. Anna and I can at least agree on the relief factor. I don't think the Conservative Party will ever fight a leadership contest like the one we've just had ever again. I don't think the kind of gap that you have between the members of Parliament narrowing down to two and that length of time before the members choose is conducive to anything positive. Now, of course, there is an argument that members should have an opportunity to, see the candidates and weigh up their merits. But for it to go on this long,
I mean, 12
I think
hustings, was it 12 hustings in the end, Alex? I mean, it did go on forever.
A lot of, and of course, the majority, something like half of all members voted by return of post. So most people had formed views already. These are two veteran politicians who've been in the front line for some time. Certainly Liz Truss is one of the longest serving cabinet ministers of the 21st century. You didn't need to know much more about her. And Rishi Sunak was the past Chancellor of the Exchequer, for goodness sake. So we knew a good deal about those candidates already. And even if you do think, it's right for the candidates to be vetted, I don't think any more we'll ever have a contest that kind of length again. On the other point that you have both been discussing about what comes next, of course, Liz Truss's answer is we need to have some tax cuts so that we can try and stimulate economic activity, stimulate growth, and in the end, that'll mean more of a return to the Exchequer. That is contrary to what some people have said. That is a Conservative perspective. It's kind of Ronald Reagan perspective rather than a balance the books perspective. Not everybody agrees with it, but it's certainly something that I think deserves to be debated. And I think that if people are really thinking about cutting back significantly on their discretionary spending, putting some money back in their pockets is not a bad idea.
Yeah, well, Rishi Sunak, of course, famously said it was a fairy tale economic plan. The front of the FT, Anna, says it's going to put £60 billion budget hole in the country's finances.
There you are. And there is the reality of this fanciful nonsense that are being put forward by Liz Truss. And it's from the Conservative Party. It's extraordinary. I mean, you could always in the past trust the Conservatives with the economy. And on this basis, you absolutely can't. And the FT quite properly is exposing these nonsenses and flaws. Just very quickly on this idea of tax cuts. I mean, if you don't have, 40% of people in this country don't pay income tax. And the idea that if you cut taxes, somehow that is going to alleviate the hundreds, the thousands of extra pounds that people are going to be paying for their energy bills is for the birds. I mean, you can't say that, this is Conservative policy. Conservative policy for generations has been this one nation theory, espoused many years ago, obviously by Disraeli, that was all about helping everybody. And it was the absolute duty of those that have to help those that do not have. And tax cuts will not achieve that. We are in extraordinary times. And we need proper cool heads doing responsible things with our economy. And you won't get that with Liz Truss, as the FT is pointing out.
Irresponsible, Alex.
Yeah, it's a shame to hear Anna talking about the party to which she used to belong like that, not least because there is a perfectly respectable economic set of thinking that says that you can stimulate economic activity by reducing the amount of tax the state takes. I do accept it doesn't address the energy issue, and that's why government also needs to reduce very significantly the amount of levies and duties that are placed upon energy bills and fuel, at least in the short term. It will run up against some proper and reasonable arguments about net zero and green targets in the future. But right now, if people are debating with themselves about whether they can afford to heat their homes, or on the other hand, the extraordinary prices they're paying at the petrol pumps, it's right for government to take off those prices that which government itself puts on it. And you can do that at the same time as trying to remove people's burdens from income tax and the like. It's not mutually exclusive. In the end, we've got to make energy cheaper in this country for consumers in the short term, because this is a real crisis. And that's quite separate to the discussion about what happens with inflation and what happens with the high street, which you can also address. And I think it's best to approach these things without an attitude of complete and utter cynicism when you think about them.
Well, the thing about tax cuts, which we already know, is that there's a real danger that they will actually increase inflation. That is the real danger in the situation, especially that we are in. And Alex, I would gently say this to you. When you've got former members of the Conservative Party, the former Conservative MPs, members of the Conservative government, with these views, I am not alone, and the Conservative Party should be really worried about what is happening in the country. People are turning away from the Tory party, looking on at this contest, and these fanciful ideas with apps. They are appalled, Alex.
OK, well,
Anna, you tested that theory. you left the Tory party, you stood as independent, you got thrashed, and Boris Johnson got an 80-seat majority. You tested that theory with the public, and they don't agree with you.
OK, well, listen, while we're talking about elections, I just want to...
We're in a different set of situations now, Alex, from where we were in 2019.
OK, let's just squeeze in the front. Sorry to interrupt. Let's just squeeze in the front of the Daily Express then, because it's sort of related before we go to the break. The Tories put on war footing for a snap election. It could happen October the 5th next year. Anna, Tory members, it seems, want Liz Truss to be Prime Minister. But what about the electorate? What about those who voted Tory last time? Are they going to want her?
I've just said. I mean, I really do think the Conservative Party is in a dreadful situation. I think people are, as I've said, fed up at the spectacle of this contest, and of course, some of the most savage attacks on the Conservative government aren't from ex-Conservative MPs like me, but by Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss themselves, trashing 12 years of Conservative government, saying things have got to change. Quite extraordinary. And I think it is, again, for the birds to think that there'll be a general election next October. Look, nobody, trying to be unpartisan about this, nobody would want to be Prime Minister coming into this huge economic crisis. It would be tough for anybody. The idea that by next October, somehow things will be better, they'll be considerably worse, and the blame will rightly be laid at the door of number 10. I'd be very surprised if there was a general election next October. OK, we're going to have to go to a break. Alex, we'll get your thoughts on a general election a little bit later on. Don't worry about that. Coming up, we're going to have plenty more in the press preview, including the Mirror's front page, which reads that the Queen has a new health blow. Talk about that and more very shortly. Hello again, part two of the press preview. Anna and Alex are still with me. Alex, front page of the Mirror, the Queen pulling out of the Braemar gathering. It's something that she loves dearly, goes every year. You sort of can expect her and forgive her for pulling out of the stuff that is perhaps a bit boring and a bit tedious, but the stuff that she actually really enjoys, when she pulls out of that, well, is it cause for concern, Alex?
I think so. Look, she can pull out of whatever event she likes. A lifetime of public service she can attend or not attend, I think, now as she wishes. But, I mean, it's a bad sign. Plainly, she loves this event. It's not, as you rightly imply, like she's passing some duties that she wouldn't have looked forward to. It's a sign like the new Prime Minister having to go to Scotland rather than being received by the Queen in London. It's the first time in over 100 years that has happened. It's obviously suboptimal, and we wish our Queen a happy and long life, but it's obviously not good that she's dropping out of commitments like this.
Anna?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the Braemar gathering is not that far from Balmoral. And it's right, the Queen does enjoy it. She certainly gives the impression that she enjoys it. I'm sure she does, actually. And it's quite a feature of her late summer, autumn stay up at Balmoral. And so I think this is, again, I agree completely with Alex. I think this is very, very disturbing because, she's such a huge part, isn't she, of our lives and our own history. And she's 96. And it just worries. I think it just worries us all that she's so poorly she can't go to the Highland Gathering at Braemar. Yeah, of course. Well, we wish her well, and let's hope things go well on Tuesday. Let's move on to the front of the Times, Alex. So the G7 finance ministers agreed to put a price cap on oil from Russia to try and reduce Moscow's revenues. And then a few hours later, this oil leak appears on the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. Coincidence?
What a terrible coincidence, just in the same way that Nord Stream 1's been under maintenance since the dispute that led to the effective cessation of Nord Stream 2. The thing about the G7 step, which of course on principle many of us will look at and applaud, is that it assumes that it's a world basic embargo or a world price cap, when of course it isn't. We talk in the media as if we've cut Russia off from the global economy, and we haven't. We've cut Russia off from the Western global economy. There are plenty of countries that will do business with Russia still. India and China, to name but two, have remained scrupulously neutral with regard to Russia's illegal and aggressive invasion of Ukraine. India has moved from being a pretty minor importee of Russian energy, especially coal, to being a massive importer of Russian coal. And you do think to yourself, well, if we say we're only going to pay so much, somebody else may pay more. I mean, it's probably a good thing that we pivot away from dependence on Russia per se anyway. It's probably a good thing that we skip straight to the conclusion, the last chapter being Nord Stream 1 being turned off. It will mean some very unattractive and unhappy moments for our friends in Germany, who are dependent on Russia for plus 50% of their gas. But I think in the long term, it's good that we get off that restriction. But in the immediate term, it's going to be uncomfortable. And you better bet in the end, the Russians will sell it to somebody else.
Yeah. Anna, just a very quick thought on this.
No, I agree with that. And actually, really don't have anything to add to it, except that, again, it just adds to the grave concerns that so many of us have about the energy crisis, rising bills, and just the overall economic situation here and obviously overseas.
Yeah, and of course, as these sanctions continue, we continue to suffer here as well, don't we? Anna, Alex, thank you both very much.